My name is Victoria Hayes, 31 years old, a pediatric nurse from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. My younger sister slept with my deployed husband, got pregnant, and my parents, my own parents, dragged me to family court demanding I pay child support for a baby that destroyed my marriage. They stood there, righteous and certain, until I pulled out a manila envelope that made the judge's face go white. Smash that subscribe button if you've ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, because what I'm about to tell you will leave you speechless. Before we get into it, hit that like button, and if you believe justice should be served no matter who it hurts, leave a comment of where you are watching from. Have you ever had family turn on you when you needed them most? Your stories matter. Now let's get into this because the betrayal runs deeper than you can imagine. I still remember the exact texture of that deployment notice. Thick military cardstock with raised lettering that felt official and final against my fingertips. August 2019. My husband, Captain Troy Hayes, 33, stood in our kitchen in full dress uniform, the afternoon sun catching the medals on his chest while I gripped the counter to steady myself. 15 months in Afghanistan. The longest deployment of his 8-year career. My stomach dropped, but I forced a smile because that's what military wives do. We swallow the fear and paint on strength. Troy pulled me close, his cologne mixing with the smell of fresh coffee I'd brewed that morning, trying to make everything feel normal. "You're the strongest person I know, Vic," he whispered into my hair. 15 months will fly by. We'll video chat every week. I'll be home before you know it. I nodded against his chest, feeling his heartbeat through the stiff fabric, trying to memorize the rhythm because I wouldn't feel it again for over a year. My little sister, Autumn Hayes. No, wait, she was still Autumn Caldwell then, 26 years old, 5 years younger than me, showed up an hour before Troy had to report to base. She burst through the front door without knocking, her sundress swishing around her knees, makeup perfect as always, carrying a care package she'd supposedly put together. Homemade cookies, some magazines, a portable phone charger. "For my favorite brother-in-law," she announced, beaming at Troy like he was a celebrity she'd just spotted. Looking back, I should have seen it then. The way her hand lingered on his arm when she hugged him goodbye. The way she laughed too loud at his jokes, throwing her head back so her hair caught the light. The way my mother, Patricia Caldwell, 58, watched them interact with this satisfied smile, like she was watching a rom-com unfold. But I didn't see it. I was too busy trying not to cry, too focused on memorizing Troy's face before he left for a war zone. My parents had always favored Autumn. Always. Growing up in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a split-level house with beige siding and a chain-link fence, the pattern was clear as day. I was the responsible one. Straight A's, nursing school, never caused trouble, married a military officer. Autumn was the baby, the free spirit who dropped out of community college twice, cycled through retail jobs, and still lived in my parents' basement at 26. When I bought my first car with money I'd saved from working double shifts at the hospital, Dad barely glanced at it. When Autumn needed a car, Dad co-signed for a brand new Honda and made a Facebook post about helping his baby girl chase her dreams. Patricia and my father, William Caldwell, 61, a retired postal worker with a beer gut and strong opinions about everything, had made it clear my whole life that Autumn needed more support. "You're capable, Victoria," Mom would say, her voice dripping with that particular tone that made it sound like a compliment but felt like dismissal. "Autumn needs guidance. She's more delicate." Delicate. That was their word for irresponsible. The day Troy deployed, I stood in our empty house after my parents and Autumn left, the silence pressing against my eardrums like water. Our bedroom still smelled like him, Old Spice and the specific laundry detergent he insisted on. I sat on the edge of our bed, the one we'd picked out together at a military surplus sale, and let myself cry for exactly 10 minutes. Then I washed my face, tied my dark hair back, and went to work my shift at Cumberland County Hospital's pediatric ward. Because that's what you do. You keep moving. The first month of deployment crawled by like years. Troy and I video chatted when we could, grainy calls where the connection cut out mid-sentence, where I could see the exhaustion carved into his face under the harsh lights of whatever tent or building he was calling from. "I miss you," he'd say, and I'd say it back, both of us pretending the distance wasn't a physical ache in our chests. Autumn started coming around more. At first I thought it was sweet. She'd show up at my house with takeout, Chinese food in those white containers that always leaked, or pizza from the place near the base that Troy and I loved. "I figured you could use company," she'd say, settling onto my couch like she lived there. We'd watch reality TV shows I didn't care about, and she'd talk about her latest job at a department store cosmetics counter, complaining about her manager, her coworkers, and the customers. Mom encouraged it. "It's good that you two are bonding," Patricia said during one of our Sunday phone calls, her voice warm with approval I rarely heard directed at me. "Autumn looks up to you. She needs a strong role model." I remember feeling a flicker of something then. Pride, maybe, or hope that finally, after 31 years, I was doing something right in my mother's eyes. By month 3, Autumn had a key to my house. I'd given it to her during a particularly rough week when I'd worked 4 night shifts in a row and barely had time to breathe. "In case of emergencies," I'd said, handing her the spare from the hook by our garage door. She'd hugged me, her perfume, something floral and too strong, overwhelming my senses. "You're the best sister ever," she'd whispered. She started doing little things around the house. Watering my plants. Taking out the trash. Once I came home from a 12-hour shift to find she'd done my laundry, folding everything neatly on my bed. Troy's military t-shirts stacked in perfect squares. At the time, my eyes had filled with grateful tears. "You didn't have to do this," I told her over the phone. She'd laughed, that light tinkling sound she made when she wanted to seem carefree. "What are sisters for? What are sisters for?" Those words would echo in my head later, bitter and sharp. Month 5. November 2019. I'd decorated the house for Thanksgiving even though Troy wouldn't be there to see it. Orange and brown garland along the mantel. A fake turkey centerpiece on the dining table we'd bought at a yard sale our first year of marriage. Autumn helped me hang lights on the porch, her breath fogging in the cold North Carolina air. "This is nice," she'd said, standing back to admire our work. "Domestic. You're so good at this stuff, Vic." I'd smiled, not noticing the way she said domestic, like it was something both admirable and pitiful. Like I was playing house while real life happened elsewhere. The Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house was the last normal family gathering we'd have. Patricia had made her famous green bean casserole and a turkey that was somehow both dry and undercooked. William sat at the head of the table, carving with his electric knife while football played too loud on the TV in the living room. Autumn sat across from me, pushing sweet potatoes around her plate, unusually quiet. "Are you feeling okay?" I'd asked her, concerned. She looked pale, her usual perfect makeup not quite hiding the circles under her eyes. "Just tired," she'd said, not meeting my gaze. "Work's been crazy." Mom had patted her hand. "My poor baby. You work too hard." Then, turning to me with an afterthought expression, "How's Troy?" "Good and safe. We talked yesterday." I'd launched into a story about his last call, about the care package I'd sent, about plans for his mid-tour leave in March. But I could feel my words disappearing into the air, unheard. Autumn had started crying quietly, tears sliding down her cheeks, and immediately everyone's attention shifted to her. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Patricia had rushed around the table, crouching beside Autumn's chair. "Nothing, Autumn had wiped her eyes, smudging her mascara. "I'm just emotional lately. Ignore me." The rest of dinner revolved around making Autumn feel better. I'd sat there, my turkey going cold, watching my parents fuss over her like she was fragile glass about to shatter. It was so familiar, so expected that I didn't even feel angry anymore. I just resigned. December came with Christmas decorations and care packages to Afghanistan. I sent Troy a box filled with his favorite beef jerky, new socks, photos of us, and a letter I'd written late at night after a particularly hard shift where I'd lost a patient. A 7-year-old with leukemia who'd coded despite everything we'd tried. I'd poured my heart into that letter, telling him how much I missed him, how I was counting down the days until March when he'd have his 2-week leave. Autumn stopped by on Christmas Eve, the night before I was scheduled to work a double shift. She'd seemed jittery, her hands shaking as she handed me a gift bag. "Just something small," she'd said. Inside was a framed photo of the two of us from when we were kids, maybe 8 and 3, at the beach. I was holding her hand, pulling her toward the water while she laughed, her chubby toddler legs stumbling in the sand. "This is really sweet," I'd said, genuinely touched. "Thank you, Autumn." She'd hugged me longer than usual, her body trembling slightly. "I love you, Vic. You know that, right? No matter what happens, I love you." "I love you too," I'd said, confused by the intensity but attributing it to holiday emotions. "You okay?" "Yeah. Just sentimental." She'd pulled back, wiping her eyes. Holidays are hard when family's apart, you know? I nodded, thinking she meant Troy. Thinking she was being empathetic about my situation. God, I was so stupid. January 2020 rolled in with New Year resolutions I didn't keep and shifts at the hospital that blurred together in a haze of crying children, worried parents, and the constant smell of antiseptic. Autumn's visits became less frequent. When I asked why, she said she'd picked up extra shifts at work. Mom said she was focusing on herself, and that I should give her space to grow. February. Troy's calls became sporadic. When we did connect, he seemed distant and distracted. You okay? I'd ask, squinting at his pixelated face on my laptop screen. Yeah, just tired. Long days. But something felt off. He wouldn't hold eye contact, even through a screen. He'd end calls earlier than usual, claiming he had duty rotations or briefings. I told myself it was the deployment. Combat zones changed people. The stress, the danger, the isolation from normal life. I'd read enough military spouse forums to know this was common. So I sent more care packages, wrote more letters, tried to be the supportive wife the handbook suggested. March 2020. The world shut down for COVID-19. And Troy's mid-tour leave got cancelled. I'd been standing in the hospital break room when I got the email. Due to global pandemic restrictions and military readiness concerns, all mid-deployment leaves are hereby cancelled until further notice. My hands had shaken so hard I'd dropped my phone, the screen cracking against the linoleum floor. 15 months had already felt impossible. Now it was extended indefinitely. I'd called Autumn, sobbing in my car in the hospital parking lot, my breath fogging the windows. She'd answered on the fourth ring, sounding strange. Out of breath. Vic. What's wrong? His leave is cancelled. I won't see him. I don't know when I'll see him. The words had come out in hiccuping gasps. There'd been a long pause. Then, I'm sorry. That's really hard. But her voice sounded hollow. Rehearsed. Can you come over tonight? I don't want to be alone. Another pause. I can't. Not feeling well. Maybe tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. Autumn stopped responding to my texts. Stopped answering my calls. When I'd driven to my parents' house to check on her, Patricia had met me at the door, blocking the entrance. She needs rest, Victoria. Don't bother her. Is she sick? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She's just going through something private. Respect her boundaries. I'd left feeling confused and hurt, but the world was falling apart with lockdowns and infection rates, and I had patients to care for. So I pushed down the worry and focused on work. April 2020. I was pulling a night shift when I got a call from Troy. Not a video call, a voice call, which was unusual. The connection was clearer than normal and I could hear tension in his breathing before he even spoke. Vic, we need to talk. My heart had dropped into my stomach. Those 5 words in that tone never meant anything good. I'd stepped out of the nurse's station into an empty patient room, closing the door. What's wrong? Are you hurt? No. I'm not hurt. God, I don't even know how to say this. His voice cracked. I messed up. I messed up so bad, Vic. The room had started spinning. I'd sat down on the edge of the hospital bed, gripping the metal rail. What did you do? Before I got deployed. Right before. Autumn and I. He couldn't finish the sentence. But he didn't have to. The silence stretched between us, filled with the sound of my heart breaking. Actually breaking. I could feel it physically, this tearing sensation in my chest like something vital had been ripped out. You slept with my sister. My voice came out flat. It was one time. I swear to God, Vic, it was one time. I was drunk, stressed about deploying, and she was there and he was crying now. I'm so sorry. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you. It's been eating me alive. One time, I repeated, my brain struggling to process. When? The night before I left. After everyone went home. She came back to the house. Said she forgot something. I'd been drinking. Don't you dare blame her. The anger came then, hot and sharp. You're a grown man. You made a choice. I know. I'm taking responsibility. I love you, Vic. This doesn't change that. It was a mistake. I'd hung up on him. I turned off my phone. Finished my shift in a fog, mechanically checking vitals and administering medications, my hands steady even though my entire world was collapsing. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot as the sun rose, watching the sky turn from black to gray to pale pink, and tried to figure out what to do with this information that was too big, too destructive to contain. When I finally went home, I'd expected to feel devastated. To cry, to scream, to break things. Instead, I felt numb. Hollow. I'd walked through my house, our house, seeing it differently now. The couch where Autumn had sat dozens of times. The kitchen where she'd cooked meals. The laundry she'd folded, touching Troy's clothes with hands that had touched him in ways I couldn't let myself imagine. My phone had 17 missed calls. 12 from Troy. 5 from my mother. I'd called Patricia back, my voice mechanical. Mom. Victoria, thank God. Troy called us. He told us what happened. Of course he had. Of course he'd run to my parents. And we need to talk about this as a family. These things happen, sweetheart. Marriage is hard, especially with deployment stress. You can work through this. These things happen? I'd repeated slowly. My husband cheating on me with my sister just happens? Don't be dramatic. It was one mistake. One night. Troy's a good man. He made a human error. Autumn feels terrible. She's been sick with guilt. She's been sick. The laugh that came out of me was ugly. Is that why she's been avoiding me? She didn't know how to face you. She's young, Victoria. He made a mistake too. But she's family. You need to forgive her. You need to forgive both of them. I'd hung up on her too. For a week I ignored everyone. I worked my shifts. I came home. Sat in the dark. Thought about divorce lawyers and military protocol and how to untangle a life I'd built over 5 years of marriage. Then on a Tuesday morning in late April, Autumn showed up at my door. I'd just gotten home from a night shift, still in my scrubs, and there she was. Standing on my porch in yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her face pale and puffy. We need to talk, she'd said. I'd let her in. Not because I wanted to hear what she had to say, but because I needed to look her in the eye and understand how she could do this to me. We'd sat in my living room, her on the couch, me in the armchair across from her, as far away as I could get. She'd twisted her hands in her lap, tears already streaming down her face. I'm pregnant. 3 words. Delivered quietly, like she was commenting on the weather. I stared at her, my brain refusing to process. What? I'm pregnant. With Troy's baby. I'm 12 weeks along. The math had been computed instantly. 12 weeks. March. Right after he deployed. Which meant she'd known for at least a month. I had known while I was calling her crying about canceled leave. While I was worrying about her health. While my entire family was telling me to forgive and move on. Get out, I'd said, my voice terrifyingly calm. Vic, please. Get out of my house. Right now. She'd stood up, stumbling slightly, her hand unconsciously going to her still flat stomach. I didn't mean for this to happen. Neither of us did. But the baby is not my problem. Leave. She'd left, sobbing, and I'd locked the door behind her. Then I'd gone into my bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left in my stomach, my body purging the poison of this information. That night I called a military family attorney. Made an appointment for the following week. Started Googling divorce proceedings for deployed service members. But my family had other plans. May 2020. The world was still locked down, everyone wearing masks, hospitals overwhelmed, and my personal life was imploding in slow motion. Patricia started calling me daily. Sometimes multiple times a day. I'd stopped answering, but she left voicemails. Long, rambling voicemails that started sympathetic and ended accusatory. Victoria, I know you're hurting, but you need to think about the bigger picture here. There's a baby coming. An innocent child who didn't ask to be born into this situation. Autumn needs support. She can't do this alone. You're the strong one. You've always been the strong one. This is when the family steps up. Family steps up. The irony wasn't lost on me. Where was the family when I needed support? When my husband was deployed and I was working myself to exhaustion through a pandemic. But apparently, family meant I was supposed to support my sister through a pregnancy that resulted from her sleeping with my husband. The attorney I'd consulted, Ms. Beverly Park, a sharp woman in her 50s with gray hair and no-nonsense attitude, had laid out my options clearly. You have grounds for divorce. Infidelity, especially documented through his own admission, gives you a strong case. Given his military salary and benefits, you're entitled to alimony, division of assets, and potentially a portion of his pension. What about the baby? I'd asked, my throat tight. Not your responsibility. Biologically, legally, financially, none of it falls on you. He'll owe child support to the mother, but that's between them. Should have been simple. File the papers. Let Troy deal with the consequences of his actions. Move on with my life. But simple wasn't in my family's vocabulary. June 2020. William showed up at the hospital. Walking right into the pediatric ward during my shift, his mask pulled down under his chin despite the rules, his face red with anger or exertion or both. The unit secretary had tried to stop him, but he'd pushed past, finding me at the nurse's station. We need to talk. Now. I'd pulled him into an empty family consultation room, my heart pounding with embarrassment and anger. You can't just show up at my work, Dad. You won't answer our calls. You won't come to family dinners. What else are we supposed to do? He'd crossed his arms over his chest, that stance he always took when he was about to deliver a lecture. Your mother is worried sick. Autumn is barely eating. And you're acting like the victim here when everyone is suffering. I am the victim, I'd said slowly, clearly. My husband cheated on me. With my sister. Who is now pregnant. How am I not the victim? Because you're making this worse. His voice had risen loud enough that I'd worried people in the hallway could hear. Troy made a mistake. One mistake in 8 years of marriage. And yeah, Autumn shouldn't have been involved, but she's paying for it. She's the one who has to carry this baby. She's the one whose life is completely derailed. You can move on, find someone else, start over. But she's stuck with this child forever. The words had hit me like physical blows. Are you serious right now? I'm saying you need to grow up and think about someone other than yourself. This baby is your niece or nephew. Blood family. And when Troy gets back from deployment, you need to sit down like adults and figure this out. Maybe counseling. Maybe you take some time apart. But divorce. Throwing away a marriage over one night. Get out, I'd said, my voice shaking. Get out before I call security. He'd left, but not before saying, you're being selfish, Victoria. And you're tearing this family apart. I'd finished my shift in a haze, my hands trembling every time I had to touch a patient. A child's fever. A teenager's broken arm. Their problems felt so clean, so fixable compared to the disaster of my personal life. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and drafted a message to Troy. Typed it, deleted it, typed it again. Finally sent it. I want a divorce. I've consulted an attorney. You'll be served with papers within the month. Do not contact me except through legal representation. His response came 2 hours later. Vic, please. Can we just talk about this? I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please don't make any permanent decisions while I'm deployed. When I get back, we can sit down face to face. Please. I'd blocked his number. July 2020. Autumn is showing now. Not much, but enough that she'd started posting photos on social media. Soft focus selfies with her hand on her small bump, captions about unexpected blessings, and choosing joy in hard times. The comments were full of support from people who had no idea the full story. My own cousins, high school friends, family acquaintances, all congratulating her, calling her brave. Patricia had shared every single post. Added her own captions, so proud of my baby girl. Becoming a mother is the greatest gift, no matter the circumstances. Hashtag grandma blessings, hashtag unconditional love. I'd blocked them both on social media. Then blocked most of my extended family when they started sending me private messages about doing the right thing and thinking of the innocent baby. The divorce papers were filed in August. Troy was officially served through his command. The process was slower because of his deployment status, but it was moving forward. I'd started looking at apartments, planning my exit from the house we'd shared. Then September came, and with it my parents filed a petition with family court. I'd gotten the notice via certified mail. Official court documents with a case number and a hearing date. The petition claimed that as Troy's legal spouse, I was partially responsible for financial support of his biological child. It cited North Carolina family law statutes about marital assets, joint liability, and parental responsibility. I'd called Miss Park immediately, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. Can they do this? Is this legal? It's creative, she'd said carefully. They're arguing that since you're still legally married, Any child conceived by your spouse during the marriage creates a financial obligation for both parties. It's a stretch and I don't think it'll hold up, but we'll need to appear and argue against it. This is insane. I'm not the parent. I had nothing to do with this baby. I know. And we'll make that clear. But your parents have clearly gotten legal counsel who's willing to try this angle. Probably fishing for a settlement or trying to pressure you into dropping the divorce. The hearing was set for late October. 6 weeks away. 6 weeks of knowing my own parents were trying to legally force me to pay child support for my sister's baby with my husband. I stopped sleeping. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in my head. What if the judge sided with them? What if some archaic law actually did make me liable? I'd worked so hard to build my career, to save money, to create stability. And they were trying to take it all to bail out Autumn. Work became my only escape. I picked up extra shifts, covered for colleagues, anything to avoid being home alone with my thoughts. My patients became my focus. Kids with asthma, injuries, infections. Problems I could solve with medicine and procedures. Not like my life, which felt like it was spiraling beyond my control. October arrived with cold rain and the hearing date looming. 3 days before we were scheduled to appear, Autumn called me from a number I hadn't blocked yet, my grandmother's landline. Vic, please. I need to talk to you. I have nothing to say to you. I know you hate me. I get it. But this court thing, it wasn't my idea. Mom and Dad are doing this without asking me. I told them to stop, but they won't listen. Then tell them to drop the petition. I tried. They think they're helping. They think if they can get you to contribute financially, it'll force you and Troy to work things out. They think they can control everyone's lives to avoid Autumn facing consequences. I'd cut her off. This is what they've always done. You make a mess and they force me to clean it up. That's not fair. None of this is fair. The anger finally broke through, hot and sharp. You slept with my husband. You got pregnant. You destroyed my marriage. And now your parents, our parents, are trying to make me pay for your mistake. Literally pay for it. How is any of this fair? She'd been crying. I could hear her gasping sobs through the phone. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant. Do not call me again. I'd hung up, my whole body shaking. The night before the hearing I couldn't eat. Couldn't focus. I'd laid out my outfit. A conservative navy dress, low heels, minimal jewelry. Everything I'd learned from Ms. Park about presenting well in court. Look professional. Look stable. Look like the victim, not the villain. I'd gone to bed early, desperate for rest before the most important day of my life. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I lay there thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Every time my parents had chosen Autumn over me. Every time I swallowed my hurt and became a bigger person. Every time I'd tell myself it would get better, that they'd eventually see me, value me, love me the way they loved her. But they never had. And they never would. At 2 a.m., I got up and went to my home office. I turned on the computer. Started looking through old files I'd scanned years ago when I'd digitized family documents. There had to be something. Anything that would help me in court. Proof of the pattern, evidence of their favoritism, anything. That's when I found it. Hidden in a folder labeled 2015 tax documents. Something I'd scanned when helping my dad organize files 5 years ago. A document I'd barely glanced at then but now read with growing realization. A trust fund. Set up by my maternal grandmother before she died in 2010. Split equally between Autumn and me. Except according to the paperwork, my parents had been the trustees. And according to the transaction history, they'd been systematically withdrawing from my half to fund Autumn's expenses. College attempts she'd dropped out of. A car loan they'd co-signed. Credit card debts they'd paid off. Over the past 10 years, they'd taken nearly $40,000 from my share. Money that should have been equally divided. My half now sat at $8,000. Autumn's was still at $45,000. I'd printed everything. Every transaction. Every withdrawal authorization. Every note that said loan to Autumn, to be repaid, that never was. At 3 a.m., I'd emailed it all to Ms. Park with a subject line, evidence of financial pattern. She'd responded by 6 a.m., this changes everything. See you at 9. The courthouse in Fayetteville smelled like floor polish and anxiety. I'd arrived 30 minutes early, my thick folder of documents clutched against my chest like armor. Miss Park met me outside the courtroom, her expression grim but determined. "The trust fund information is solid," she'd said, her voice low. "It establishes a clear pattern of financial favoritism and potential mismanagement. But Victoria, understand this. Bringing it up in open court means airing all your family's dirty laundry. Are you prepared for that?" I'd looked through the courtroom doors where I could see my parents already seated, Patricia in a purple blouse and William in his only suit. Autumn sat between them, her pregnancy now obvious at 6 months, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "I'm prepared," I'd said. "One more thing." Miss Park had pulled out her own tablet. "I did some digging last night after you sent those documents. Your sister Autumn filed for state assistance, WIC Medicaid food stamps. On the applications she listed her household income and assets. She claimed 0 savings, 0 trust fund, 0 financial support from family. That's fraud. If she has access to a $45,000 trust fund, she doesn't qualify for those programs." My stomach had dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means if we bring this evidence forward, your sister could face criminal charges. Your parents too, for helping her conceal assets." She'd met my eyes squarely. "I need you to understand the full implications before we proceed." I'd stood there in that courthouse hallway, the weight of the decision crushing down on me. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. This was about permanently destroying what was left of my family. Once these facts came out in court, there was no taking them back. But then I'd thought about them trying to force me to pay for Autumn's baby. About my parents systematically stealing from my inheritance to fund their favorite daughter. About Autumn posting happy pregnancy photos while I worked double shifts to pay for a divorce I didn't want. "Proceed," I'd said. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The judge, Honorable Ruth Vernon, a black woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on her nose, sat elevated behind a wooden bench that looked older than me. My parents' attorney went first. Harrison Webb, a local family law guy with a cheap suit and an expensive watch. He'd laid out their argument with charts and citations, claiming that North Carolina marital law created a shared obligation, that Troy's income during our marriage had built assets that could be divided, that the child's well-being superseded my personal feelings about the circumstances. "The petitioners are seeking a modest monthly contribution from Mrs. Hayes," Mr. Webb had said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Not full support, but a recognition that this child, though born of unfortunate circumstances, deserves financial stability. Mrs. Hayes has a successful nursing career, no dependents of her own, and as the legal spouse of the child's father, bears some responsibility." I'd watched my parents nod along, their faces sympathetic masks. Autumn kept her eyes down, tears sliding down her cheeks for the judge's benefit. Then Miss Park stood up. And the temperature in the room changed. "Your Honor, the petitioner's argument rests on a fundamental misrepresentation of both law and fact. Mrs. Victoria Hayes is not the biological parent of this child. She had no part in its conception. In fact, the child was conceived through an act of infidelity that destroyed her marriage, an affair between her husband and her own sister, the woman sitting beside the petitioners." Webb had tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand, gesturing for Ms. Park to continue. "Further, the petitioners have engaged in a decade-long pattern of financial favoritism and potential misconduct that directly contradicts their claims of financial need." Ms. Park had placed the trust fund documents on the evidence table. "Mrs. Hayes discovered last night that her parents, acting as trustees of an inheritance fund, systematically withdrew nearly $40,000 from her share over 10 years to support her sister Autumn, the same sister now claiming poverty to justify this petition." I watched my parents' faces change. Patricia's mouth had opened slightly, her lipstick suddenly too bright against her paling skin. William's jaw clenched, his hands gripping the table edge. Miss Park continued, her voice steady and devastating. "Moreover, Ms. Autumn Caldwell filed applications for state assistance programs, WIC, Medicaid and SNAP benefits, claiming 0 assets and 0 family support. Yet according to these trust documents, she has access to $45,000. That's assistance fraud, Your Honor. She's taking resources meant for genuinely needy families while sitting on a substantial trust fund her parents helped her conceal." Autumn had started crying harder, her shoulders shaking. Patricia reached over to grip her hand, but I could see the panic in my mother's eyes now. Judge Vernon had leaned forward, her expression sharpening. Mr. Webb, did your clients disclose this trust fund to you? Webb had gone pale. Your Honor, I was not made aware of any. That's a no. The judge's voice cut through his stammering. Ms. Park, I'm assuming you have documentation to support these claims? Complete transaction history, Your Honor. Dated, notarized, with trustee signatures. Both petitioners signed every withdrawal authorization. I've also pulled Ms. Caldwell's assistance applications from public records. They're dated within the past 4 months, well within the period when she had access to these funds. The judge had taken the documents, her reading glasses sliding down as she examined page after page. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat, the rustle of paper, someone's phone vibrating in the gallery behind us. Your Honor, Webb had tried again. Even if there were financial irregularities, which I'm not conceding, that doesn't negate the fact that there's a child who will need support. My clients are simply trying to ensure. Your clients, Judge Vernon interrupted, her voice cold, appear to have committed fraud. Against their own daughter, against the state assistance programs, and now they're attempting to use this court to compound that fraud by extracting money from the very person they've been stealing from for a decade. She'd removed her glasses, fixing my parents with a stare that could have frozen water. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, stand up. My parents had risen slowly, William's face now deep red, Patricia trembling visibly. I'm denying this petition in its entirety. Mrs. Victoria Hayes has no legal, financial, or moral obligation to support a child that is not hers. A child conceived through infidelity that ended her marriage. Beyond that, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of assistance fraud. The judge's gavel had come down with a crack that echoed. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Both of you. Using the courts to victimize your own daughter after years of financial abuse. Get out of my courtroom. The bailiff had stood, clearly ready to escort them out if necessary. My parents stumbled toward the exit, Autumn sobbing between them. As they passed my seat, Patricia had hissed at me, her voice venomous. You just destroyed your own family. No, I'd said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. You destroyed it. I just refused to let you destroy me too. They'd left. The courtroom had cleared. Ms. Park had squeezed my shoulder, her professional mask slipping to show a genuine smile. That was one of the most satisfying hearings of my career. Are you okay? I nodded, not trusting my voice. We'd gathered our documents, scheduled a follow-up appointment to discuss next steps, and I'd walked out of that courthouse into the October sunshine feeling like I'd just survived something catastrophic. My phone started buzzing immediately. Texts from cousins, aunts, uncles, people who'd been at the hearing or heard about it within minutes. Some were supportive. Most were horrified that I'd turned on my family and gotten them in legal trouble. I'd blocked them all. Every single number. That night I sat in my living room, not Troy's, not ours, just mine, and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. This felt special enough. I'd toasted to myself, to my grandmother who'd had the foresight to leave me something even if my parents tried to take it, to Ms. Park for being brilliant, to Judge Vernon for seeing through the manipulation. The divorce proceedings accelerated after that. Troy's command had been notified about the court case. About Autumn's pregnancy. About infidelity. The military takes adultery seriously. It's actually against the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Troy was facing disciplinary action, possibly affecting his rank and pension. He tried calling from a new number. Left a voicemail that I'd listened to once before deleting. Vic, I heard what happened in court. I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this. Your parents had no right to do what they did. I know I messed up, but I never thought it would go this far. Please, can we just talk? I get back in December. Can we meet face to face before you finalize anything? I hadn't responded. November 2020. The district attorney's office had indeed opened an investigation. A detective named Lucas Freeman, a weathered man in his 40s with kind eyes, had contacted me for an interview. I met him at a coffee shop, provided copies of all the trust fund documents, answered questions about my parents' financial management over the years. This is pretty clear-cut, he'd said, reviewing the paperwork. Asset concealment, fraudulent assistance applications. Your sister signed those applications under penalty of perjury, knowing she had access to funds. That's a felony. What happens now? I'd asked, my coffee going cold in my hands. We'll interview them. Give them a chance to explain. But honestly, Ms. Hayes, with documentation this thorough, they're likely facing charges. Your sister definitely is. Your parents potentially for conspiracy and aiding fraud. How long? Cases like this can take months. Maybe a year. But it'll move forward. He'd closed his folder, his expression sympathetic. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. These programs are for people who genuinely need them. Your sister took resources from families in a real crisis. I nodded, but the guilt still sat heavy in my chest. Not guilt for what I'd done. They'd earned every consequence. But the weight of knowing I'd set in motion something that would likely send my sister to jail, destroy my parents' reputations completely, and permanently sever every family tie I had. Was it worth it? I'd ask myself that question every night. And every morning I woke up and decided, yes, it was. December 2020. Troy returned from deployment 2 days before Christmas. He'd texted from a number I hadn't blocked yet, asking if we could meet. I'd agreed, but only in a public place. We'd met at a diner off base, the kind with vinyl booths and waitresses who'd worked there for 30 years. He looked different. Thinner, older, his military haircut grew out slightly. The confidence he usually carried had evaporated, replaced by something that looked like shame and exhaustion. "Hey," he'd said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Hey." We'd ordered coffee and neither of us drank. Sat in silence for a long moment before he finally spoke. "I heard about the court case. About your parents. About Autumn getting investigated." He'd run his hand over his face. "Vic, I am so sorry. I never imagined it would spiral like this." "What did you imagine?" I'd asked, my voice flat. "That I'd just accept it? Raise your baby with my sister like one big happy family?" "No, I don't know. I wasn't thinking." He'd met my eyes then and I'd seen genuine pain there. "I destroyed everything. My marriage, my relationship with your family, my career. I'm being demoted, by the way. Knocked down to lieutenant. The adultery charge went through. And Autumn. What about Autumn? She's a mess. Living with your parents still, but they're barely speaking to her. Blaming her for the investigation, for the court case. She calls me sometimes, crying, asking what we're going to do about the baby." He'd laughed bitterly. "Like I have no answers. I'm about to be divorced, demoted, and a father to a child conceived in the worst possible way. I should have felt satisfied. Should have been glad they were all suffering. But mostly I just felt tired. I'm not dropping the divorce," I'd said clearly. "Nothing you can say will change that. I know. I'm not asking you to." He'd pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. "I already signed everything. No contest. You can have the house, the car, whatever you want from our joint accounts. I don't want to fight you." I'd taken the envelope, not opening it. "Okay. For what it's worth, you deserved better than me. Better than all of us." His voice had cracked. "You were the best thing in my life and I threw it away for one stupid drunk night that I can't even fully remember. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to know that I know how badly I messed up." "Okay," I'd said again, because there was nothing else to say. No words that would fix this or make it hurt less or turn back time. We'd parted in the parking lot. No hug, no handshake. Just a nod and walking to separate cars. The last time I'd see my husband, my ex-husband, I corrected myself. Christmas 2020 I'd spent alone. Worked a hospital shift on Christmas Eve, came home to my quiet house and watched old movies. It should have been depressing, but it felt peaceful. No forced family dinners. No pretending everything was fine. Just me and the freedom to feel whatever I needed to feel. January 2021. The divorce was finalized. Victoria Hayes became Victoria Hayes again, but different. Lighter somehow despite everything. The house was mine. The savings accounts are divided. Troy's pension would pay me alimony for the next 3 years. Enough to rebuild what my parents had stolen. And then in February the formal charges came down. Detective Freeman had called to let me know before the public arrest records went up. Autumn Caldwell has been charged with 2 counts of assistance fraud and 1 count of perjury. Your parents, Patricia and William Caldwell, have been charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and financial exploitation. When? They'll be arraigned next week. Bail will likely be set. But Victoria, you should know, this is going to be public. Local news might pick it up, especially because of the connection to military infidelity. Are you prepared for that? I'd thought about it. About my name in the papers, my family's shame broadcast for everyone to see. About colleagues and patients' parents recognizing me, whispering, "I'm prepared," I'd said. The news hit local media exactly as Detective Freeman predicted. Local family charged in welfare fraud scheme, ran in the Fayetteville Observer. The article didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. Anyone who knew my family could connect the dots. They included the details about the pregnancy resulting from an affair with a deployed service member's sister. That specific detail that made it scandalous enough to share. My phone had exploded with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some are supportive. Many are judgmental. "I can't believe you got your own parents arrested. The family is supposed to forgive. That baby is innocent in all this." I changed my number. Created new social media accounts under a slightly modified name. Built boundaries that should have existed years ago. The arraignment was a cold morning in March 2021. I hadn't planned to attend, but Ms. Park had suggested it might give me closure. So I'd sat in the back of the courtroom watching my parents stand before a different judge as charges were read aloud. Patricia had looked smaller somehow. Her signature purple outfit was replaced with a gray sweater, her hair not styled the way she usually wore it. William stood with his shoulders hunched, none of his usual bluster visible. Autumn, her pregnancy now in the final weeks, could barely stand, her public defender holding her elbow to steady her. Bail was set at $5,000 each for my parents, $10,000 for Autumn because of her additional perjury charge. They'd posted it within hours, probably draining what was left of that trust fund to do it. Their trial was set for June, giving everyone time to prepare. But the damage was already done. My father's postal pension was under review. My mother had been placed on administrative leave from her teaching job pending investigation. Autumn had lost her apartment, moved back in with them fully, preparing to have a baby in a house filled with resentment and legal bills. I should have felt vindicated. This was justice, wasn't it? They'd stolen from me, betrayed me, tried to legally extort me. They were finally facing consequences. But watching them leave that courtroom, their family shattered and futures uncertain, I'd felt something more complicated. Relief, yes. Satisfaction at boundaries finally enforced. But also grief for the family we could have been if they'd just loved me equally. If they'd just seen me. Back at work, life continued its strange new normal. My colleagues knew something had happened. You can't disappear into a dramatic divorce and family scandal without people noticing. But Southern politeness meant no one asked directly. They'd just been extra kind. Covered shifts when I needed time off. Brought in extra coffee on hard days. One of the pediatric residents, a woman named Camila Torres, became an unexpected friend. She'd pulled me aside one day in April after a particularly rough patient case. "You look like you need to talk," she'd said simply. Over coffee in the hospital cafeteria, I'd told her everything. Not the legal details but the emotional weight of it. How I was grieving people who were still alive. How I felt guilty and relieved and angry all at once. "You know what I think?" Camila had said, stirring sugar into her terrible cafeteria coffee. "I think you're allowed to feel all of it. You don't have to pick one emotion. They hurt you for years and you finally stood up for yourself. That's brave, not cruel." Her words had settled something in me. Permission to be complicated. To not have a clean narrative where I was purely a victim or victor, but just a person trying to survive betrayal. May 2021. Autumn had her baby. A girl. I'd heard through a mutual acquaintance, she hadn't told me directly. 7 pounds, healthy, named Lily. Troy had been there for the birth, apparently. His and Autumn's families were now permanently intertwined through this child who'd never asked to be born into such chaos. I'd wondered briefly if I should send a card or gift. Acknowledge my niece's existence. But Miss Park had advised against it. Any contact could be seen as accepting responsibility. Keep your distance. So I'd done nothing. Sent nothing. And tried not to think about a baby girl who was technically my family but felt like a stranger. The trial came in mid-June. I'd been subpoenaed to testify, which meant facing my family in court again. Miss Park had prepared me thoroughly. Just answer the questions honestly. Don't elaborate. Don't let them make you emotional. The courthouse was more crowded this time. The case had attracted attention. Local news cameras outside, a few reporters in the gallery. I'd worn the same navy dress from the family court hearing, armor that had worked once before. The prosecution went first, methodically laying out the evidence. Bank statements showing the trust fund withdrawals. Autumn's assistance applications with her signature. Testimony from the social services investigator who'd audited her case. It was damning, presented in clinical detail that left no room for sympathy. Then they called me to the stand. I'd walked up, been sworn in, and sat in that wooden chair facing a courtroom full of strangers and the family that had betrayed me. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Chin, had asked straightforward questions. Ms. Hayes, were you aware your parents were withdrawing money from your share of the trust fund? No. I discovered it the night before our family court hearing when I was looking through old documents. How much has been withdrawn from your share? Nearly $40,000 over 10 years. And were you ever asked permission for these withdrawals? No. I wasn't told the trust fund even existed until I found the documents myself. What was your financial situation during the period these withdrawals were being made? I was working full-time as a nurse, often picking up extra shifts. I was living paycheck to paycheck while saving for my future. I had no idea I had inheritance funds that could have helped. The prosecutor nodded, entering my trust documents into evidence. Then came the harder part. Ms. Hayes, can you describe your relationship with your sister Autumn prior to these events? I'd taken a breath. We were close, or I thought we were. She spent a lot of time at my house while my husband was deployed. I gave her a key, trusted her. She presented herself as supportive. And when did you learn about her relationship with your husband? April 2020. He called me from Afghanistan to confess they'd been together the night before his deployment. How did you learn about pregnancy? She came to my house and told me. She was 12 weeks along at the time. What was your reaction? I asked her to leave. I started divorce proceedings. I tried to move forward with my life. The defense attorney, a younger man defending Autumn, had tried to paint me as vindictive during cross-examination. Isn't it true you were angry at your sister? Yes, I was angry. My husband and sister had an affair that destroyed my marriage. Angry enough to want revenge? Ms. Park had objected, but I'd answered anyway. I didn't seek revenge. I defended myself when my parents tried to make me financially responsible for a child that wasn't mine. That's when I discovered the trust fund theft. But you did report your sister to authorities, knowing she'd face criminal charges. I provided evidence of fraud to the court. The district attorney decided to pursue charges based on that evidence. I didn't make that decision. He tried a few more angles, but Ms. Park's objections kept shutting him down. When I'd finally stepped down from the stand, my legs were shaking, but I'd held firm. My parents testified in their own defense. Patricia had cried, claiming she'd only wanted to help Autumn, that she'd always planned to pay back my share of the trust. William had been defiant, insisting they'd done nothing wrong, that family money should go where it's needed most. Autumn's testimony was the hardest to watch. She'd sat in that witness box, her baby girl with Troy's family for the day, and sobbed through her explanation. I made mistakes. I know that. But I was scared. I didn't know how to tell my sister. I didn't know how to afford a baby. When my parents suggested I apply for assistance, I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. The prosecutor had been merciless. Did you or did you not have access to a $45,000 trust fund when you signed these applications? Yes, but did these applications specifically ask if you had any assets or savings? Yes. And did you check the box saying you had none? Yes. Her voice had been barely a whisper. No further questions. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. On all counts. Autumn was sentenced to 18 months in prison with 3 years probation. My parents each got 1 year with probation, plus restitution to the state assistance programs. They'd also have to return my full share of the trust fund plus interest. I'd sat in that courtroom as the sentences were read, watching my mother collapse into sobs, my father's face go blank with shock, Autumn's lawyer scramble to file appeal paperwork. And I'd felt empty. Not triumphant. Not satisfied. Just exhausted and sad and relieved it was finally over. They'd been led away to begin processing. None of them looked at me. And I didn't look at them. Outside the courthouse, reporters had tried to get a statement. I'd pushed past them to my car, driven home in silence and sat in my driveway for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. That night, alone in my house, I'd allowed myself to fall apart. Cried for the family I'd lost, for the betrayals I'd endured, for the person I'd had to become to survive it all. Cried until there was nothing left. And then I'd gotten up, washed my face and started planning my future. 18 months later. Fall 2022. I'd left North Carolina. The memories were too heavy, the town too small. I'd applied for nursing positions across the country and accepted an offer at a children's hospital in Seattle, Washington. 3,000 miles from Fort Bragg, from my family's scandal, from the life I'd built and watched crumble. Seattle rain was different from North Carolina rain. Softer, more constant, less dramatic. I'd found a small apartment in Capitol Hill with a view of the Space Needle if I craned my neck just right from the bathroom window. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Fully, completely mine. Work at Seattle Children's was demanding but rewarding. New colleagues who knew nothing about my past except that I was a skilled pediatric nurse who'd relocated from the East Coast. I'd made friends slowly. Camila had helped with that transition, visiting once and introducing me to her cousin who lived in Tacoma. Small connections that gradually built into a support system. I'd started therapy. A counselor named Dr. Yolanda Wright specialized in family trauma and betrayal. Once a week, I'd sit in her office with its soft gray walls and plants on every surface, and I'd unpack years of damage. You're allowed to grieve them even though they hurt you, she'd said during one session. Grief and anger can coexist. You can be glad you set boundaries and still miss having a family. That permission had been transformative. I'd spent so long trying to feel one way, angry or sad or vindicated, when the truth was I felt all of it all the time. My parents had served their sentences. Last I'd heard through the family grapevine I'd mostly blocked, they'd moved to a smaller house in a different town, trying to rebuild their reputations. Patricia had lost her teaching license permanently. William's pension had been reduced. They were aging and diminished and, from what I understood, barely speaking to each other. The blame for their downfall ricocheted between them constantly. Autumn had been released after serving 13 months with good behavior. She'd moved to Virginia with Troy. Yes, Troy, who'd apparently decided to build a life with her and Lily after our divorce finalized. They weren't married, but they were co-parenting. I'd seen exactly one photo shown to me by a distant cousin who didn't know better. Autumn looked tired. Older. The baby Lily, now 2 years old, had Troy's eyes and Autumn's smile. I'd looked at that photo for maybe 5 seconds before handing back the phone and changing the subject. I didn't wish them ill. But I didn't wish them anything at all. They'd become ghosts of a past life, people I used to know who'd caused me pain and were now just gone from my story. The trust fund money had been returned to me. $40,000 plus interest and court-ordered compensation came out to about $52,000. I'd used it to pay off my student loans completely. The rest went into a savings account I didn't touch, growing slowly, a safety net my grandmother had meant me to have all along. Sometimes, late at night in my Seattle apartment with rain pattering against the windows, I'd think about alternate timelines. What if Troy hadn't cheated? What if Autumn had never gotten pregnant? What if my parents had loved us equally, distributed that trust fund fairly, treated me like I mattered? But those what-ifs led nowhere useful. This was the timeline I lived in. The one where I'd been betrayed and had fought back. Where I'd lost my family but gained myself. I'd started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but casual dinners and coffee dates with people who had no connection to my past. A teacher named Marcus who made me laugh. An accountant named Priya who shared my love of terrible reality TV. Just moments of connection that reminded me I was still capable of trusting, of opening up, of building new relationships on my own terms. Work kept me grounded. The children I cared for, kids with cancer, with cystic fibrosis, with injuries and illnesses that put my own problems in perspective. A 7-year-old named Zoe who'd beaten leukemia and drew me pictures of rainbows. A teenager named Jordan who'd survived a car accident and was relearning to walk. They reminded me daily that resilience was possible, that people could survive the unsurvivable and come out stronger. One evening in December 2022, exactly 2 years after Troy had returned from deployment and our marriage had officially ended, I sat down and wrote a letter. Not to send, just to process. Dear Mom, Dad, and Autumn, I don't forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. What you did wasn't a single mistake. It was years of choosing yourselves over me, over fairness, over basic decency. But I've stopped waiting for an apology that will never come. I've stopped imagining a version of you that doesn't exist. You are who you are. And I am who I am now, someone who survived you. I hope you've learned something. I hope Autumn is a better mother than our parents were. I hope Troy is a better father than he was a husband. I hope, despite everything, that little Lily grows up in a home that doesn't favor one child over another, that doesn't steal from her, that doesn't teach her that love is conditional. I'm doing well. Better than I ever did trying to earn your approval. I have a career I'm proud of, friends who actually see me, a life that's mine. You don't get to be part of that life. Not anymore. This is goodbye, even though you'll never read this. Victoria. I'd folded that letter, put it in an envelope, and locked it in a fire safe with my other important documents. Physical proof that I'd said goodbye, even if only to myself. The holidays that year were quiet but peaceful. I'd volunteered for Christmas shifts at the hospital, giving colleagues with young children the time off. Spent New Year's Eve with Priya and a few other friends, watching the Space Needle fireworks from a rooftop bar, toasting to new beginnings. And when 2023 started, I'd made a resolution to stop looking backward, to stop checking Facebook for updates about my family, to stop wondering if they ever thought about me, if they ever regretted their choices. Because the truth was, it didn't matter. Their regret or lack of it couldn't change what happened. Couldn't give me back the years I'd spent trying to be enough for people who would never see my value. What mattered was that I'd stood up for myself. I'd set boundaries that were painful but necessary. I'd chosen my own well-being over keeping peace with people who'd never kept peace with me. Some people would call that selfish. Some would say family should forgive anything. Those people have clearly never had family weaponize love, steal from them, try to legally extort them, and then play victim when consequences arrive. I'd learned that blood doesn't mean unconditional acceptance of abuse. That being the strong one doesn't mean absorbing everyone else's dysfunction. That sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away and build a life with people who actually deserve access to you. My grandmother's trust fund, what she'd left specifically for me, had been a gift beyond money. It had been proof that someone somewhere in my family tree had seen me as valuable, had wanted me to have something of my own. Even though my parents had tried to take that too, the fact that it existed at all meant I'd been seen by at least one person. And that was enough to build on. Now, in my Seattle apartment with my carefully chosen plants and secondhand furniture and walls, I'd painted myself a soft sage green. I was building something sustainable. Not the picture-perfect military wife life I'd tried to create. Not the devoted daughter hoping to finally earn equal love. But something real and messy and entirely mine. My patients knew me as Nurse Victoria, the one who never lost her patience, who could sing kids through injections, who stayed late to read bedtime stories to children whose parents couldn't be there. My friends knew me as the person who'd laugh at dark humor, who'd show up when she said she would, who was learning to trust again. And I was learning to know myself. Not as someone's daughter or sister or wife, but as Victoria. Just Victoria. That was enough. To everyone who made it to the end, thank you. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose yourself over family, if you've ever been the scapegoat in a family that favored someone else, drop a comment. Share your story. You're not alone. Hit that subscribe button if you believe boundaries aren't cruel, they're survival. And remember, family is supposed to lift you up. If they're tearing you down, you have every right to walk away. See you in the next one.